Emma Frame here, and welcome to Voices of Yoga podcast, co-hosted with Lindsay Porter, where we bring you inspiring yoga stories and insights from yogis and teachers from around the world. These stories highlight the benefits of yoga and encourage those who maybe haven't started yoga yet to get started, and for the more experienced to delve deeper. We hope you enjoy. This is podcast number 144 and video podcast number 15.
Namaste and welcome. I'm Lindsay Porter, co-host along with Emma Frame for our Voices of Yoga podcast series. And it's always a joy to interview lots of people on our series, and sometimes I get the opportunity to talk with a teacher that's a little bit more known to me, and it's always great because I end up finding more about them than I already know. And today I'm delighted to have yoga teacher and trainer Judy Cameron with me on the show. And we're going to be talking to Judy a bit more about the things she's experienced with her yoga and her life. Just to give you a little bit of background about Judy, she has been teaching yoga since '95. And she specialises in a few different things, including pregnancy yoga, postnatal, chair and special yoga for children. She's a lead tutor for the Yoga Scotland teacher training programme. She's also the co-director of YogaBirth teacher training based in London. And she leads British Wheel modules in pregnancy and postnatal London in various places around the UK. And she's a retired nurse and midwife. So firstly, welcome Judy to Voices of Yoga today.
Hi, lovely to be here, Lindsay.
Thank you for joining me. So Judy, I do know a little bit about you already, and I know you have such an interesting and magical story behind your journey into yoga. Would you mind sharing it with us, to the listeners?
It's difficult to know where to begin, actually, because in some ways, and I've heard a lot of people say this, that sense of the yoga being within and when it actually started, in some ways it feels like it was always there, without trying to sound too much of a cliche. But I was brought up in the country, and I was the youngest of 3 children, and I spent quite a lot of time on my own when I was little. And I do remember having time to think and to contemplate and to go for walks in the country. And I do remember very clearly, I must have only been about 5 years old, wondering why I was here and what it was all about. And thoughts that, according to Piaget, if you know anything about education, according to him, that small children don't think about. And then, in terms of sort of movement, I was never any good at games at school. I was actually marked down as, well, just somebody who wasn't very good, could never catch the ball, and was always last if there was a race. So I kind of gave up on that. But I loved cycling and I loved swimming. So I just did that at home, where I didn't have to compete. And this idea of being able to enjoy some physical activity that would take me into another place without it being anything to do with competition really appealed to me. Now, the first yoga class I went to was actually in 1974. And when I say that to my students, I say, particularly on the teacher training, I say, I know that's probably long before any of you were born. Not so with my older students, I must say, which is reassuring. But that was the first yoga class I went to in Bristol. And it was an evening class in a little primary school. And what I loved about that was just the mix, the fact that everybody, all generations were there, and that you could just go at your own pace. So I dipped in and out of yoga after that for about the next 15 years or so. During that time, I moved to London. I went to London to train as a nurse, and I specialised in cancer nursing. And I would dip in and out of yoga at the Shivananda Yoga Centre, which was in Notting Hill in those days. And what I liked about that is towards the end of the class, when you're in Shavasana, this smell of curry used to waft into the room. And of course then you could go and eat curry afterwards. So that was very appealing. So this idea of sort of curry and India and yoga all sort of started to come together. And I used to go to the Shivananda Center with my best friend. She was my best friend from school. And she eventually became a yoga teacher. So it was something we could do together. And something which she went on to do when she became pregnant with her first child. But about that time, this would have been in the late 1980s, after she had her first child, in fact, nothing was going too well for me in my personal life in London. And so I decided to cut my losses, as it were, and go and do VSO, voluntary service overseas. And that took me to Bhutan. I had a choice of 3 countries, and I chose to go to Bhutan to work in a hospital at Thimphu, the capital. And I was the nurse in charge, the sister in charge of a surgical ward, 32-bedded ward. And while I was there, while I was in Bhutan, I met my to-be husband, and we were married there. Both children were conceived there, in fact. And when I was pregnant with my first child, my best friend back in the UK said, "Whatever you do, you've got to do yoga." So I used to go and do little bits of pieces. Used to do some yoga with a German woman who lived behind us. And when I came back to the UK and I continued my yoga practice in my pregnancy, it suddenly opened up something more than a physical exercise for me. It became the way in which I prepared for this journey to motherhood. And it touched me very deeply. And it had a huge effect on my experience of giving birth. I actually enjoyed giving birth. In fact, I wished I could have had loads and loads of children. I enjoyed it so much. And I found it powerful. I found it changed me in so many ways. And so when I had my second child, I had a home birth. We'd not long come back from Bhutan, and I had a home birth, which again, I thought was just the best thing ever, and felt deeply compelled to share this with other people. So I went to, I was going to say I went to India, but before that, around this time, my best friend was having her second child. But what I haven't said is that she had been diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she actually died when I was staying with her. I was with her when she died. And after that, I felt that it was so clear what I had to do was to follow the path that she'd already started. So I went in 1995, I went to India to do the Shivananda teacher training, and met lots of interesting people there. And as soon as I came back, I started teaching, but I also signed up to train with Janet Velasquez, whose book had such an impact on me. And I trained to be an active birth teacher. It was a teacher training with a large childbirth component to it. And when I started the course, it was 2 years in those days, I remember we had all this stuff about childbirth, and I thought, yeah, but I just want the yoga. It's just the yoga that I want to do. And I couldn't understand why we weren't doing all the sort of Shivananda stuff. And John Stirk would come and teach us yoga on a Friday evening. And we used to stand for ages and then walk across the room. I used to think, oh, when are we going to get started? And the thing is that I looked at John Stirk, and he moved with a grace, and he touched the earth in a way that I'd never seen before, hadn't seen that in any of the people I met in India. And so I stayed with it. And he talked about Vanda Scaravelli, who at that time was still alive. And he talked about his students who were also teaching a similar approach to him. And so I started seeking out these students who were actually, older than me, put it like that. I met Sandra Sabatini, and I met various other associated teachers like Pete Blackaby, Sophie Hoare, and from then on, I continued to work in that. Some people call it Scaravelli-inspired yoga, but I worked along those lines, and kind of left my Shivananda foundation behind. I might say it's always there, but if you like, your foundation, your first teacher's always there. But this took me into another place. Just briefly, we went back to Bhutan in 1998, and it was after a further spell there of 2.5 years that I came home and realized that there was something missing in my teaching yoga to pregnant women, and I trained to be a midwife. So I worked as a midwife and a yoga teacher for about 14 years before I retired from the NHS in 2014. So that sort of briefly sort of outlines how I got from sort of walks on my own as a small child to the yoga that I'm practicing today.
Wow, what a full, amazing journey it's been and is. So something that always like comes to mind when I'm talking to you, Judy, and finding out what you're up to is just the amount, and COVID aside, fair enough, but the usual amount of travel that you do in various parts of Scotland where you're normally based, but also wider than that across the UK and beyond, just to share your yoga with all these different parts of the community. And that of course takes a lot of energy and effort. And I'm just interested to ask you, what helps sustain that level of movement and energy that you require to be able to do that and give to others?
Well, I think one of the things that really helps me, I mean, quite apart from the yoga, I mean, the yoga will always support and nourish me from within. But I have a very supportive family. My husband and I, we met when we were in our mid-30s. So by which time we both led quite independent lives. And when whenever we do anything, and it's been like this from the start, it's never been, is it all right if I do this next weekend? Or would you mind if I did? It's always, I'll be away next weekend. Or he quite often says to me, I've booked a flight to Nepal in 3 weeks' time. I'll be away for a couple of months. So, and that's always been okay. So I think that permission, that space that I've been given has helped enormously.
Wow, yeah. Lovely. And I also know, of course, that you have a very special connection with Buddhism, and that's something that you also follow. Do you find that kind of comes into that as well for you in any way?
I think it does. I mean, my journey towards that is that's interesting, because I remember in the sixth form when I was at school, we did what was called divinity, and in the it was the lower sixth. It was done in such a way we were given this. We could look through this big book that belonged to the headmistress of all the different religions, and we could focus on one and then explore it a little bit. And Buddhism was the one that I chose, funnily enough. And when I was in Bhutan, it's initially it was a fascination, I suppose, and a deep respect for what I found there in terms of Buddhism. I could talk at length about that, but I would say that the turning point was when the second time I went to Bhutan. I went to some teachings of a Rinpoche called Songsa Khyentse Jamyang Rinpoche, who was born in Bhutan. He spends most of his time now, I think, in Canada, between Canada and Taiwan. And there was something about his teachings that touched me very deeply. And I was able to speak to him, and I've since been on retreats with him. Not very many, because he doesn't tend to come to this country very often, or even to Europe. But it was enough to make the difference, so that in 2003, that's when I took refuge with Akong Rinpoche at Samiling. And I think it's a sort of it's the underlying principles that help guide me, and to really look at, when somebody says something, so often we take it personally, don't we? And so then we sort of react to that, and then try to sort of justify why we're actually okay. So it suddenly becomes all about me. Whereas so often if somebody says something that doesn't sit comfortably with you, it may well tell you more about them. And I find that the Buddhism helps with that. For sure, yeah.
You find all that kind of skills and knowledge and training just flows so well into when you're doing your work as a teacher trainer for other people coming on the yoga path.
Yes, as a teacher trainer, it's interesting. I mean, you'll know this yourself from teaching on the foundation, particularly at the beginning when you're first meeting people, and it's something you're continuing to refine, but you do make judgments about people. We all do. I can remember one course, there was someone, and I always thought that she didn't really like me because she always questioned things, and she always looked at me in a particular way. Later, I found, just through some other things that she said, once the course had finished, that I completely misread the whole thing. And I thought, you were not coming from the right place in the beginning. I wasn't. Yeah. So you don't just get it like that. It's just like yoga. It's a constant refinement.
And what's that great expression, when one teaches to learn? And it's sort of being constantly reminded of that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Judy, there's like a plethora, as we all know, of new and different yoga teacher trainings out there these days, as there should be, because it's yoga for everyone and lots of different styles suit people. But I think one thing that maybe gets a little bit more tricky for people trying to discern what is the I suppose the signs of a good quality yoga teacher training. And I just wonder, with all your personal experience and the fact that you go across quite a lot of different schools of yoga, what kind of things you would suggest to people out there that may be considering taking that step onto their yoga teacher training path?
Yes, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we all have slightly different ideas of what a teacher training course will do. And I myself have done the intensive 200-hour over 4 weeks in the Shivananda training, and I've also done the 2-year British Wheel diploma. So kind of as well as active birth, which was 2 years, but I've done those two extremes, 200-hour, 500-hour. I think if you do a 200-hour course, it's almost taken as read that it's you will need to do more. That however whatever shape or form that takes, it may not be a formal training, but it doesn't stop there. I think if you want the depth if you're looking for depth and a really good foundation, then a 500-hour course over 2 years gives you an opportunity to grow. You don't really have that opportunity in the intensive, because you grow from inside, and it allows you the time to explore and to question. And I think that's very important, rather than doing a particular course where it's a one size fits all and you teach in a sort of Simon Says fashion. That's very easy to do, very easy. But to have the opportunity to go deeper, be it the philosophy, be it the application of the anatomy and physiology, and the anatomy and physiology is so much more than a book, or even one of those beautiful apps that you can kind of go inside the body. It's not like that. It really isn't like that. I guess no sense of how that feels and how that feels for different people. And I think it's useful to be on a course where there is some sort of external assessment, which where an independent assessor assesses somebody, not to do with the course itself. You see this in the British Wheel. You see this in many different trainings. You see it in Yoga Scotland. You see it, yeah. There's many others that do it, and it somehow makes it more transparent. More transparent in so much that it becomes less. There's something less sort of in-house and cliquey about it. Right. Some trainings, I think, are very much stroking their own ego, and which is nice, you know, when you feel that you're a really good teacher. But the reality is that you have to go and do it out there.
Yeah, and I have to say, one of the things I'm always reminded of and inspired by when I catch up with you, Judy, is the way that, you know, with all your wealth of experience, and so many people look up to you and have trained with you, and yet, you know, you still come across and you're saying, oh, I did a one-to-one with such and such this week, I did a, you know, and now of course it's over Zoom, you do your breath practice. And I think that's really important, because you just sort of demonstrate this continual learning and practicing, no matter how much experience you kind of ratchet up, is like part of the journey, right?
Yes. I mean, I'm a one-to-one, as in that I'm the one receiving the teaching. Yes. And I've had one-to-ones with one of my teachers, Diane Long, who actually was with Vanda Scaravelli in, I believe, nearly 30 years. She was the longest, her longest serving student, and Diane is amazing. She's in her 70s now. She spends half her time in the States, half her time in Italy, and to have a one-to-one with Diane, we were talking about this, and she said you still need, everybody needs that time to check in with their teacher. Otherwise, you're in danger of going down, you know, a rabbit hole or a cul-de-sac, and you think that if you keep going down it, you'll get there, and actually you've taken a wrong turning. And it's not easy to know that, to find that when you're in your own practice.
Yeah. So again, I love that as a reminder to all of us. And also that you mentioned before about you were doing some lovely exchanges with another teacher, how you were like supporting each other during lockdown. Is that right?
Yes. I don't know if I should mention her name, but it was another very well respected teacher who surprised me by asking me if I'd like to do a yoga exchange over lockdown, which was amazing, because it meant that she taught me for an hour, and then another day I taught her for an hour, and that was such a generous offer, and it was a gift. I could never have sought that out. It was something that had to come to me. And I think a lot of yoga is like that. It's about providing the right conditions for something to happen, rather than this sort of pushing, reaching, grasping, pulling, pushing. It's a sort of metaphor for that, if you like.
Oh, wonderful. What a great idea as well. Perhaps others will pick up on that and start doing some more of that. So Judy, I'm interested just to allow you to ask the question, is there anything else about your yoga practices or your teaching or your journey you'd like to share today?
Yes, I think just a couple of things, perhaps perhaps a little bit about life in Bhutan, because although I only spent 6 years there altogether, and some people would say only 6 years, they were very precious years, because when I went to Bhutan as a VSO, I was coming from a very dark place, and I not only found love, and I also found, and of course my children were conceived there, I was married there, but also I discovered something much deeper within myself, not least through Songtse Khyentse Rinpoche. But also, also I learned a lot of other things about how to approach anything in life. For example, as a VSO nurse, I wanted to go out there and just fix everything. I mean, you can't imagine what the conditions were like we were working under. And a lot of the equipment we didn't have. Thank goodness I used to watch Blue Peter as a child. So I used to make a lot of things I called Blue Peter things, like neck collars. I'd make them out of cardboard and gauze. Wow. and make them to fit and things like that. And after about 6 months, I realized that perhaps I wasn't going about things in quite the same way. For example, one day the king came to visit the hospital, and we frequently ran out of water. So I just stepped forward and spoke to the health minister who was right next to the king. And I said, while you're here, I wonder if you could get the water sorted out. Well, can you imagine doing that in the UK? It's the equivalent. I mean, people thought, who is this woman? And of course, the king stepped forward. But that kind of although the water did get fixed, it wasn't the right way to go about it. So learning about how another culture works and took time. But once I discovered that, I realized that working with somebody on their own, at their pace, with some sort of discussion, but also collaboration, was actually a way to affect lasting change in anything that you do. So that was a big lesson for me, and that which I took into my yoga. And another one was that when we were in Bhutan, it was the time when most people don't know about this, but when the Bhutanese government actually banished a huge number of southern Bhutanese over a couple of years, so that by the end of 1992, about 100,000 refugees were sitting in refugee camps in eastern Nepal. And this gave me almost a chance to examine or to experience the illusionary sort of nature of things, the way Bhutan presents itself in a particular way as the land of gross national happiness, and the reluctance of the Western community to question this, and how did that sit with me? So there were lots of sort of these sort of things come up in life all the time, don't they? How do we deal with one thing, but when it's like that? So that has definitely shaped things for me hugely. Having said that, I've never been happier than I was in Bhutan. It's a beautiful place, and please do go one day. And the other thing is just about my yoga journey and my yoga practice. And I mentioned this earlier about yoga is not about push and pull and making shapes. One of the fundamental things that Vanda Skaramet-Belly talked about was the ground, the breath, and the spine. And it's it's the experience of all that really coming together. I mean, really feeling it. Really, I mean, really, 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 when you feel it, then you realize you've never felt it before. And it's when it happens, it is just so joyful and so beautiful, and that I almost want to cry. And where it's almost like, I think of it a bit like trying to catch a feather, because you have to move so carefully and almost intuitively. And then when it's there, you think, oh, wow, how beautiful. But the moment you try to hold on to it, you know, you crush it, it's gone.
Wow.
And that's that I have to work with the whole of the time. And actually to teach that is the hardest thing, because everybody wants to know, is it right arm up, left arm down? Or is it left arm up, right arm down? You know, and it's not, it can be something that I can do it in chair yoga, or I can do it in pregnancy yoga. I can, yeah, it's something inside. And that's the real beauty. That's the real jewel, the precious essence of everything, which is beyond words. And I just wanted to say a little bit about that.
Thank you for sharing all of that. We always like to invite our guests to share with them a favourite quote, or something that's maybe just currently inspiring their yoga practices or teaching, or on the journey. Do you have something you could share with us that's inspiring you at the moment, Judy?
Yeah, well, I always find it difficult to choose one thing, so I have actually chosen two.
That's okay.
And they're actually two quotes from women, which perhaps less usual. And the first quote is one from Vanda Scaravelli. And she said, "Yoga is an effortless dance with breath and gravity." Yoga is an effortless dance with breath and gravity. So I love that, because it encapsulates so much. And the other one is, I think you have to sit with it, because it goes beyond just saying, just be kind and be this and be that. And it's from Maya Angelou. And she said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel."
Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and as a yoga teacher and as a tutor, that I think of that a lot.
And I find that also gives tutors and teachers permission not to grasp onto remembering everybody they teach too, right? Because the other side of it sometimes feel you have to connect, remember everybody, but actually it's about what you share with them and that feeling.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I think that is a great moment to let everybody continue to sit with that, as you've suggested there, and just to thank you, Judy, very much for coming on to Voices of Yoga today and sharing your story and all your insights and inspiration. Namaste.
Thank you, Lindsey. Namaste.
Thanks for tuning in to Voices of Yoga, and we hope you feel inspired. You can find more of our free podcasts at www.voicesofyoga.com, and we are on all the main podcast platforms too. We are very open to comments and suggestions, so if you'd like to also leave us a review on iTunes, that would be fantastic. If you would like to know when the most recent podcast is going to be broadcast, you can sign up to our newsletter on the website, and we will drop you an email with that recent update. Voices of Yoga is our passion project, and if you like what we're doing and you would like to support us, it would be very much appreciated. And you can do that through a very small donation on our website on the donation button if you feel so inclined. If you would like to collaborate with us in terms of sponsorship, advertising, or even suggest coming on and being a guest, then please drop us an email at voicesofyoga@mail.com. So thanks again, and we look forward to bringing you another inspiring yoga story next week. Namaste.